site selection logic? Well, we know that we are going to have numerous partners, and our clients even long-term will dictate to us that we use their intelligent equipment or IoT inputs. So we have to be prepared to be able to consume a lot of information and normalize that and then pass it over to our activity management environment, all leveraging the response platform. And that gets a little tricky to try to get all these values to be consistent when the technologies and connectivity and styles are all going to be different and they'll evolve. So for the site selection, this logic has been set and is being proposed. Essentially, we will determine what sensors we need per asset. I'm looking in the upper left-hand corner of the screen. And based on the value, and that value is determined by the delta at which the sensor perfect point of control has either deviated positive or negative. So if it's temperature in the space, and the space temperature is set at 72, and we said that between 72 and 75 is the maximum value that's going to go one direction, and 69 to 72 at the other side, then each of those would see a scale of either plus 100 points or minus 100 points. And so each sensor itself can contribute a value, but all sensors aren't created equal, and based on the assets, these sensors might have different influence. And so there's also this horizontal line that indicates influence, and those above the horizontal line have greater influence. In other words, programmatically, they would be weighted differently than the other sensors. So for instance, in this example, still looking in the upper left-hand corner for a typical asset, energy might have the greatest weight of all. And so if the deviation was X, maybe just a small change in that deviation would cause a significant value change. Keeping in mind that the maximum value to the positive is 100 and the maximum value to the negative is 100. And you can see some examples here of just an asset, how we are using the sensors per asset. And if you look in the upper right-hand corner, we're still at one site. This example site is 12 Main Street in Irvine. I'm looking in the upper right-hand corner, and I see that now each piece of equipment or asset also has a influence and a value. And these together drop down to the bottom, which is what's going to help us choose the site. And the sites then are compared in a portfolio. Of course, if this client only has one site, then, the bottom process becomes pretty simple. So let's take a look. Oh, by the way, these are all zeroed in this example because a unit is off and the sensor values are being ignored. So I put a little time lapse. This is at 2 a.m. in the morning. This is pretending that this same unit at 12 Main in Irvine, it's 8 o'clock in the morning. The building's just started. And now let's take a look at what the sensors are doing in the upper left-hand corner. And so we see that we've hardly got anything running on this package unit, but let's just say the fan's running. And so the energy is low, so we get a really low score there, a negative 52, again, 0 to 100 each direction from the vertical center, top dead center there. The delta T is, just slightly cooler or less than target, which is fine. And you can see all the other sensors. Space temperature, since just started, is just coincidentally at set point. The supply air might be a little warmer because we haven't turned on the compressor yet, because the return air is coming back cool and you see that represented in the negative 12, and the differential pressure switch is not tripped. And so you see that just staying straight at top dead center right there in the middle on the vertical line. If you look to the right, you can now see how the building's starting to perform. If we look at points, then we can see that let's first look at the influence the units have on the building. So we can see that AC1 and AC2, the two assets at the very top on the right, both have higher influence than the assets at the bottom, AC3 and 4, both have a lower influence. This is a generic example, but it shows you relative components of influence. We can see that this building, since it's just started, many things are in the negative. We end up with negative 114 points. If we go to the bottom, looking at this, client has 3 buildings, 12 Main, 2 First, and 18 Fair. We can see that, again, we follow the same logic of how the assets might have a greater or less than influence, how the sensors might have a greater or less than influence. We also look at site selections, how they might have a greater or less than influence on the portfolio, the client's portfolio. So we see that 12 Main and 2 First Street both have lower influence than does 18 Fair. And coincidentally, if we look at the small Excel graph inserted, we see that 18 Fair had a score at 4 o'clock this morning of 538, and that the last time this was updated, that somebody was on site. If we roll the clock forward a little more, jumping from 8 o'clock to 2 p.m. in the afternoon, we can see that things have gotten a little worse for 12 Main. If we look in the upper left, AC1, some object has flown against the inside filter bank and blocked the filter. So the first thing we notice at the very bottom is that differential pressure switch, which is a 2-position switch, tripped, and it sent the full value of 100. Of course, this could be adjusted, but its influence is lower, so it's already weighted. We see that our supplier temperature is rising. Our return is rising greater than that away from set point. Of course, I'm working from the bottom up in the upper left-hand corner. The space temperature is getting there. Our delta T is creeping up, and we're not using a ton of energy over the value, mostly because we've constrained the fan, but we're trying like the dickens to get this space cooled down. If you look in the upper right-hand corner, again, the influence of AC1 and AC2 is still high. It's above the center line. But now it's actually moved over, and it looks like I have a graphical error that should have been moved, that red should have been moved over to the right on AC2. But they're both in the upper influence, and their scores 259 and 178 for AC2. AC2 happens to be running fine, but it's on the south side of the building right next to AC1, and it's taken a hit from the heat being not relieved by AC1. And you can see now that the 12 Main score is up to 425, where when the building started just 6 hours ago, the score was a negative 114. So if we look to the bottom half of the screen, now we can see that 12 Main has still got, it's just a commercial office building, just like 2 First, where 18 Fair is a medical facility. So it's a higher influence in the portfolio. But you can see now that if you look at the graph on the far right-hand side, you can see 12 Main has popped onto the hey, I need some attention chart. And it shows its value of 425 when it was last updated at 1 p.m. We're looking at a snapshot from 2 p.m. And it's showing that action has been taken, that the person's en route. Also note that 18 Fair, which previously was sitting at 538, was repaired this morning a few hours ago and now seems to be back under control as a building. We don't see the air conditioning units on anything but 12 Main Street, but we're assuming that things are getting back into control in that building, and we haven't marked as resolved. However, it stays on the notification list until its value gets somewhere in the neighborhood of 0, and that should be adjusted as well. And so while lengthy, you can see in summary that every piece has influence on the other, each using the same logic of value, both negative and positive value from a center line, each having a weighted influence, how it drops in a weighted scale. And if you're programming that, it could be 100 points of weight if you want from top to bottom, whatever's most convenient. And you can see that we not only allow weighting of sensors, but we allow weighting of air conditioning equipment or assets to the site, to an individual site. And then for those customers with multiple sites, which we imagine our first use of the response platform will be with clients in that area, that we allow the influence of sites against one another as well. So we cover it in 3 areas: sensors, assets, sites, as they relate to the portfolio. Breaking it down to simple math, this should allow us to swap in and out any sensor we require for any application, regardless of the asset, regardless of the size of the portfolio. It keeps it to a simple math equation. That's all.